When you first open up a student's similarity report or originality report, you will see colored sections of highlighted text. And as mentioned previously, Turnitin is matching the paper against the internet, the archived internet, databases from periodicals, magazines, newspapers, journals, trade publications. Many of these publishers are cooperating with Turnitin to protect their authors. Think of Google Books scanning millions of books. So most of the content that a student would have access to, especially on the web, Turnitin will find that and match that in the student's paper and indicate that with colored highlighting. The reason that Turnitin uses colored highlighting is to help distinguish one quote or one section from another. Notice that Turnitin gives this flag section a number 1, and we go down a little bit further, we see number 1 repeated. So this way you know that anything with this pinkish color is from the same source. Many times students will use a source repeatedly or maybe overwhelmingly in a report, as we mentioned before. Number 4 is in a bluish color. And the reason that Turnitin gives different numbers to these is that number 1 would be the source that comprises the largest amount of outside source material that the student used. So number 1 source would be the most significant source used in the paper, and then on from there. Notice number 4, if you click on the 4 at the top of these flag sections, that will open up a little preview window of the excerpt that the student used. So we see that this was Vanity Fair, and in bold highlighting is the excerpt that the student used with some of the preceding material. So it just gives you a little better idea where this quotation belongs. And you can open that further by clicking on this book icon. Turnitin gives you a website, a web link here, so you can actually go to Vanity Fair. Most likely Vanity Fair is the original publisher of this material, but many times students will use different websites that have maybe an abstract from a journal article, and they're not aware that they're not even looking at the original document. So Turnitin is just with these links helping you to find your way back to the original document. As I mentioned, Vanity Fair, there really isn't much you need to do. You could tell student used a magazine website. Maybe they should be using the database to look at magazines and newspapers because the indexing is much stronger. So that's up to you to decide. And once again, these highlighted sections, many times you'll find things that aren't a problem. You might find a small match, or a common phrase like "open the door" would be something that you would see on millions and millions of documents. So that's not something to worry about. So you have to go and decide. No, first thing you could do is look at these sections, the colored sections, and see, did the student attempt to cite these sections? Is there any a parenthetical citation? Is there a quotation for a direct quotation in MLA or APA format? Did they apply anything? Are they putting this out as their own words? Sometimes you'll see, as in this section, that there's highlighted section, and then some words aren't highlighted. Sometimes students will try to paraphrase and insert their own words, or they might paraphrase in a sloppy fashion. They don't realize that they have to totally re-summarize the ideas in their own words. So you'll find things like that. Another thing you could do when you first open up a student's paper is to navigate over to, remember these 3 toolbars here are Feedback Studio. The blue section is the comment, you're commenting on the paper. Your markup would be you'd work through here and activate your markup on there. The red section is the Originality report, the Similarity report, and then the purple section down here is the ETS machine-generated grammar icon. And remember, we can click on the top of each of these toolbars to activate any one of these or activate them all at the same time. But first, looking at a student's paper, you could click on the the similarity score, the number here on the toolbar. And that will open up something called the match overview. So what this is just telling you how many different sources a student used in this paper. And once again, I mentioned that Wikipedia was the most significant source, so it gives it a number 1. And journals.sagepub.com, this is an example of a site that a student might have gotten lucky and found the full text to an academic journal. More times than not, this is actually linking to a site that has maybe a reference to an article and the student used the content and is not realizing that it's from another document that might not even be available freely on the internet. So they might not even be able to get this full document. And they might not find that out until it's time to actually redo their citations, or you've had a consultation with them. So you can see vanityfair.com. These are the most common sites that a student would find doing a general Google search. The types of sites that would show up in the first few pages, they have high domain authority. Turnitin could never tell you exactly what site a student found a source on. But once again, as I mentioned before, Turnitin just has all this information to help you wind your way back to figuring out where the source comes from. Even if a student cited something properly, you just want to see what the source is, or to see, students should be providing a bibliography page for a documented essay. And you should be able to match the source that the student used should show up somewhere on the list. Now, if you see if a student is doing a paper that's not supposed to be using outside sources, not a documented essay, you shouldn't really be seeing flagged content here. Now, you can get even more information. So if you click on the similarity score and you open up the match overview, and you just want to get dive deeper into this, you can click on, see this first Wikipedia 29%. There's an arrow here. So there's a match overview. Then there's also a match breakdown. So I can take each one of these sources, and Turnitin is just telling me that the excerpt that the student used appears on all of these different websites. So we don't know which one the student used, but sometimes there might be an instance where you're just confused about something that a student used. So Turnitin gives you possibly more information than you usually need, but it's kind of interesting to see. So in a perfect situation, this would be a tree, meaning that the quote that the student used started out on Wikipedia and then fanned out here. But it doesn't always work that way. But a lot of times you'll see a major source and then all the underlying sources going down. You see down here it says exclude sources, so you can actually exclude some of these if you don't think they're problematic. But I mentioned before that most people that use Turnitin a lot, they just go through the paper and look for things that they think are problematic. Most of this deeper dive stuff is just once in a while it might be interesting to do that, but day in and day out you'll probably just be satisfied with just seeing that, number one, something that's flagged, you can be pretty sure it's not the student's own words, and then you get an idea of some of the popular sources that a student would find that on. The typical source, the most likely ones, would be the major ones without even doing the match breakdown.